The morning light came through the kitchen window in that particular way it does in November, pale and thin, like it wasn't sure it was welcome. I was sitting at the table with both hands wrapped around my coffee mug, not drinking it, just holding it, feeling the warmth against my palms. At 67, you learn to hold on to small warmths wherever you find them. My name is Dorothy. I worked 31 years as a hospital administrator in a mid-sized town in Ohio. I raised one son, Marcus, mostly on my own after his father left when Marcus was 9. I drove him to baseball practice and math tutoring and, later, to SAT prep courses on Saturday mornings while I graded expense reports in the parking lot. I am not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling you so you understand what it meant when my son called me on a Tuesday evening last April and said, "Mom, I need to talk to you about the wedding. Stephanie thinks it would be better if you weren't in the reception photos." That was how it started. Not with cruelty exactly, with a careful, rehearsed sentence that had clearly been written by someone else. I didn't say anything for a moment. Outside my window, a cardinal landed on the feeder I keep stocked through every season. I watched it. "Marcus," I said finally, "what are you talking about?" He cleared his throat. He'd always done that when he was uncomfortable. Since he was 12 years old, that little sound had told me everything. Stephanie just feels like, and I agree with her, I do, that the photos should have a certain look. Her family is very put together and her mom has already coordinated everyone's outfits, and it would just be easier if I wasn't in them. Silence. "I could still come to the ceremony," he said, "just not the reception photos, and maybe sit toward the back during the dinner portion." Stephanie's worried about the seating arrangement. I set down my coffee mug very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands have started to feel unreliable. "I see," I said. "Mom, don't be like that." "I'm not being like anything, Marcus. I'm listening." I listened. He talked for another 4 minutes, filling the space with words like optics and both sides of the family and just this one day. I had raised this boy. I had sat with him through chickenpox and heartbreak and one very long night in the 8th grade when he was convinced he had ruined his entire future by failing a pre-algebra test. I had told him then that one night doesn't define a life. I believed that still. I just hadn't known the lesson would someday be applied to me. When he finished, I said I would think about it, and I got off the phone and I sat in my kitchen until the cardinal flew away and the coffee went completely cold. I want to tell you something about Stephanie because I think it matters. I don't want to be unfair to her. She came from a family in Connecticut with a certain kind of money, not showy money, but quiet money, the kind that expresses itself in marble countertops and understated clothing and the assumption that things will always be arranged to their satisfaction. She wasn't a cruel person. She was a person who had never been asked to make room for anyone who didn't already fit into her picture. The first time Marcus brought her home, she looked around my living room, at my furniture, my photos, the quilt on the armchair that my mother had made, with an expression I recognized. It was the expression of someone cataloging what they would eventually replace. I had told myself I was imagining it. I wasn't imagining it. Over the 2 years Marcus and Stephanie had been together, I had watched my son slowly adjust himself to fit her frame. He stopped wearing the Cardinals cap he'd had since college. He started saying, "we feel," when he meant Stephanie thinks. He stopped calling me on Sunday mornings, which had been our standing tradition since he moved out at 22, and started calling on Tuesday evenings instead, which I later learned was because Sunday mornings were reserved for brunch with Stephanie's parents. I had told myself these were small things. Couples adjust. You can't hold on too tight. But there was the matter of the money. I need to be honest about this part because I've thought about it a great deal, and I believe it's important. Over the previous 4 years, from the time Marcus started graduate school through the beginning of his career as a software consultant, I had given him, in total, somewhere around $90,000. I had done this gladly. From savings I built carefully over 30 years. skipping vacations and driving used cars and bringing my lunch to work in a bag every single day. I gave him money for his graduate school application fees. I gave him money when he and two friends tried to start a company and it didn't work out. I co-signed his first lease. I helped with the down payment on the condo he and Stephanie now shared. A condo that I had never once been invited to spend the night in, though I lived 4 hours away and had driven down twice when Marcus was sick. I had given this money without conditions because that's what you do when you love someone. But I had given it understanding that I was part of his life. The phone call in April told me otherwise. My friend Linda came over the next morning. Linda and I have been friends since our daughters. She has 3. I was close to her girls growing up. We're in elementary school together. She is 71, small and sharp. With silver hair she keeps in a practical cut and a way of getting to the center of things that I have always appreciated. I told her what Marcus had said. I told her the whole of it, the optics and the seating arrangement and the photos with the coordinated outfits. Linda sat with it for a moment. Then she said, "Dorothy, what are you going to do?" I said I didn't know yet. She said, "Are you going to give them the wedding gift you'd planned?" I had set aside $15,000 for the wedding gift. I'd been adding to it quietly for 2 years, thinking about what kind of start I could give them. I told Linda yes, I thought I probably still would. She looked at me for a long time over her tea. She didn't say what she was thinking. That's one of the things I value most about Linda. She lets me arrive at things myself. The wedding was in June, at a venue in Connecticut that Stephanie's family had reserved. It was a converted estate, the kind of place with a long gravel driveway and flowering hedges and a tent the size of a small airplane hangar. I received my invitation 4 weeks before the ceremony, later than anyone else I suspected. There was a handwritten note from Stephanie on her monogrammed stationery that said she was so glad I could be part of their special day. The note was very nicely written. I have a sense for when words have been chosen carefully to cover what isn't being said. My instructions were clear, outlined in a follow-up call from Marcus. I would be seated in the 3rd row during the ceremony. The family rows, he explained, started at the front, and the 3rd row was still family, just a little further back. I was not to come to the rehearsal dinner, which was a small event for immediate family, meaning Stephanie's parents and her 2 sisters and their husbands. I was not included in the wedding party photos. I was welcome at the reception dinner, but had been seated at a table near the back of the tent with several of Marcus's colleagues from his first job and a cousin of Stephanie's, who I gathered was also considered difficult to place. I drove myself to Connecticut alone. I had been offered a ride by Marcus, an offer extended so briefly and with such obvious hope that I'd decline it that I said no thank you without hesitation. I stayed at a Holiday Inn 12 minutes from the venue. I brought the navy dress I'd worn to my nephew's wedding 3 years ago and had dry cleaned for the occasion. I brought low heels because I knew I'd be on my feet. I brought a small gift bag with a card. I did not bring the check. The morning of the wedding, I sat in my hotel room and I thought about who I was. I thought about the woman who had packed lunches and driven to parking lots and co-signed leases. I thought about 31 years of work and the savings that represented not just money, but choices. Trips I hadn't taken, things I hadn't bought, time I'd spent differently. I thought about the cardinal at the feeder. I thought about my mother's quilt. Then I got dressed and I drove to the estate and I sat in my assigned seat in the 3rd row. The ceremony was beautiful. I will say that honestly. The flowers were extraordinary, white peonies and something else I didn't know the name of. Stephanie was lovely in her dress. When Marcus appeared at the front of the aisle, I looked at his face, my son's face, the face I had known since before he could speak, and I felt, despite everything, a surge of love so strong it was almost painful. That's the thing no one tells you about this kind of hurt. It doesn't cancel the love. It lives right alongside it, and some days that's the harder thing to carry. I did not cry during the ceremony. I watched. I sat with my hands in my lap. I thought, this is one day. You can give him this day. At the reception, I found my table near the back of the tent, and I introduced myself to the colleagues and the difficult cousin, whose name was Perry and who turned out to be excellent company. He had a dry sense of humor and a story about Stephanie's mother at a previous family wedding that made me laugh for the first time in weeks. We talked through most of dinner. The food was very good. I drank 1 glass of champagne during the toasts. Marcus came to my table once, briefly, between courses. He was flushed with the happiness of the day and something else, something that looked like relief, I thought. Relief that things had gone smoothly, that I had followed the instructions. I'm glad you're here, Mom, he said, and he bent down and hugged me in that quick way he had. One arm, efficient. I know you are, I said. He went back to his table. I watched the dancing for a while. Stephanie and her father, then Marcus and Stephanie, then the floor opened up. I wrote them the game. I am the game. I wrote the rules, broke them, her gently, under the lights the wedding planner had strung above the tent. And I thought about a night 25 years ago when Marcus was 8, and we'd pushed the living room furniture back and danced to an Aretha Franklin record because there was a thunderstorm and I wanted him not to be scared. He'd stood on my feet and I'd moved us both across the hardwood floor. I left at 9:15. I said goodbye to Perry, who gave me his email address and said I was the most interesting person he'd met at a Connecticut wedding in 15 years. I found my coat at the coat check. I walked to my car on the gravel drive, listening to my own footsteps. I did not leave the envelope. I want to tell you what I did instead and why. I drove back to my Holiday Inn and I sat on the edge of the bed and I thought for a long time. Not with bitterness, though I want to be honest that bitterness was present, like weather in a room. But mostly I thought with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I thought about the pattern. Not just the wedding. The wedding was only the sharpest point of it. I thought about the Sunday calls that became Tuesday calls. I thought about the condo invitation that never came. I thought about the time Marcus forgot my birthday 2 years in a row, and both times there was a note from Stephanie that said, "So sorry, we've just been so busy." As if busy were a natural disaster that strikes without warning. I thought about $90,000 and a third-row seat and a table by the back of the tent. I thought about what Linda had said, sitting across from me with her tea, not saying what she was thinking. I called her from the hotel room at 9:45. "How did it go?" she asked. "The flowers were beautiful," I said. She waited. "I didn't give them the check," I said. A pause. Then, "Okay." "I've been thinking," I said, "that I spent a very long time making myself smaller so other people could feel more comfortable, and I'm 67 years old, Linda. I don't have unlimited amounts of time to keep doing that." "No," she said, "you don't. I'm going to go see Ruth when I get back." Ruth was my attorney, a sharp woman I'd worked with for years on various estate matters. "I want to make some changes." "That sounds right," Linda said. "I'm not doing it out of spite," I said, and I believed this. I had examined it carefully and I believed it. I'm doing it because I've realized that I've been treating generosity like it was a way to earn love, and it's not. It can't be. And if I keep doing it, I'm going to spend whatever years I have left waiting for something that isn't coming in the form I've been hoping for. Linda was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Dorothy, I've been waiting for you to say that for about 3 years." I laughed. It surprised me how real it felt. I drove home to Ohio the next morning. The drive was 4.5 hours, and I listened to an audiobook I'd been meaning to get to, something a colleague had recommended about a woman who walks across Spain alone. I stopped at a diner outside of Pittsburgh and had eggs and real coffee and read the first 20 pages of a novel I'd bought in the gift shop. I tipped the waitress $5 on a $9 check. She had tired eyes and moved with the careful efficiency of someone who had been on her feet since 5 in the morning, and I recognized something in that. The following Thursday, I sat in Ruth's office and I went through everything carefully. Ruth had known me a long time. She asked good questions and didn't rush me. By the end of the meeting, I had made several significant changes. Marcus remained in my will because I am his mother, and that will not change. But the structure of things was different now, and the $15,000 I had set aside for the wedding gift, I redirected to 3 places. A partial scholarship fund at the hospital foundation where I'd worked. A contribution to the women's shelter 2 streets over that had always needed more than it got. And the remaining portion I kept, tucked into a savings account labeled simply with my own name. That last part was Linda's suggestion. Keep some for yourself, she'd said. Go somewhere. Do something you've been putting off. I booked a trip to Portugal for the following February. I had never been to Europe. I had told myself for 20 years I would go eventually, when things settled down, when it was a good time. Somewhere between those years and this hotel room in Connecticut, I had understood that there is no eventually. There is now, and there is the accumulation of all the nows that have already passed. Marcus called on a Tuesday evening in August. His voice had the tone of someone who has been briefed. He asked how I was doing, and I said I was doing well, and I told him about Portugal, and there was a pause in which I could feel him recalibrating. That sounds great, Mom, he said, and he sounded genuinely uncertain, which was the most honest he'd seemed in some time. I think so, I said. He asked about Thanksgiving, whether I was planning to come down. He and Stephanie were hosting. They'd gotten a larger table, he said. Room for everyone. I told him I would think about it. I told him I'd let him know. I want to be careful here because I don't want to make it sound like I've written my son off or that my heart has closed in his direction. It hasn't. Parents don't work that way, at least not this parent. What I have done is stopped pretending. Stopped performing smallness in exchange for a seat at a table I was entitled to sit at by virtue of 31 years of showing up. You can love someone completely and still stop funding a version of yourself that they find convenient. That's what I've learned at 67, sitting in a hotel room in Connecticut with 1 glass of champagne and the memory of my son's arm around me, quick and efficient and real. I flew to Lisbon in February. I went alone. I stayed in a small hotel in the Alfama neighborhood, on a street so narrow 2 people could barely pass each other without turning sideways. In the mornings, I walked and drank coffee at small tables outside and watched the city wake up. In the afternoons, I went to museums and sat by the river and read. One evening, I went to a fado concert in a little restaurant and listened to a woman sing with the particular kind of grief that doesn't require translation. The grief that is just the sound of being human and knowing it, and I cried for the first time since April. It felt like something releasing, like a window being opened in a room that had been closed too long. I have a photograph from that trip, taken by a stranger I asked on a bridge overlooking the river. I am standing alone, my coat on, my hair doing what my hair does in wind. I am not performing anything in that photograph. I am just there. 67 years old and still taking up exactly the space I'm supposed to. I keep it on my kitchen windowsill next to the cardinal feeder. Some mornings when the light comes in thin and pale and uncertain, I look at it and I think, yes, that's who you are. Don't let anyone move you to the back row again. Not even someone you love. Not even then. I've thought a lot about what Dorothy's story teaches us, not just about family, but about the quiet, daily choices that determine who we become. There is a kind of giving that comes from love, and there is a kind of giving that comes from fear. Fear of being left behind. Fear of not being enough. Fear that if you stop providing, you will stop mattering. Dorothy spent years giving from that second place without fully realizing it. She funded a life for her son, co-signed his future, built a foundation beneath him with her own hands and her own savings. And somewhere along the way, the giving stopped being a gift and became a negotiation she didn't know she was losing. That's not a moral failure on her part. It's something that happens to people who love deeply and quietly, people who believe that devotion, if sustained long enough, will eventually be recognized. What Dorothy had to learn, and what I think many of us have to learn, often the hard way, is that love given without self-respect doesn't teach anyone to value it. It teaches them to expect it. The people around us learn how to treat us from watching what we accept. When Dorothy accepted the Tuesday calls instead of the Sunday ones, when she accepted the condo visits that never came, when she drove 4 hours to sit in a third-row seat and eat dinner at a table near the tent flap, she was, without meaning to, teaching her son that this was acceptable. Not because she was weak, but because she believed, with real conviction, that endurance was the same thing as love. It isn't. Endurance without boundaries is just disappearance in slow motion. What changed for Dorothy wasn't her love for her son. That didn't diminish. What changed was her understanding of herself. That her worth was not conditional on how much she gave or how little space she occupied. The moment she sat in that hotel room in Connecticut, alone with 1 glass of champagne and 31 years of memory, and decided not to leave the check, that was not bitterness. That was clarity. Hard-won, long overdue, completely honest clarity. The choices we make about what we'll accept and what we won't are not small choices. They accumulate. Every time we make ourselves smaller to fit someone else's picture, we confirm to ourselves, and to them, that we are the kind of person who does that. And every time we stop, we begin, slowly, to become the kind of person who doesn't. Dorothy went to Portugal. She stood on a bridge and let a stranger take her photograph, and she looked like exactly who she was. A woman who had built something real with her life, and finally, at 67, was living in it without apology. That's not a small thing. That's everything. Whatever you're carrying right now. Whatever version of a third-row seat you've been accepting. I hope this story reminds you that it is never too late to stand up, walk out to the gravel drive, and decide that you are done being arranged.